Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's virtual wine tasting with Teperberg Winery and Donnie Friedenberg. Great stuff, great wines to try today. Really excited about it. I also want to give a shout out to Eric, who's here, and the man behind the scenes, making sure all this stuff is operating. Josh is going to be emceeing, as always. Josh from the IWPA, the Israeli Wine Producers Association.
Hello, I'm far from the star. The star always gets the hat tip to the 4 a.m. club over in Israel. Right. So, you guys, we all, if you don't take anything else away from this whole presentation that Kosherwine.com has been doing, you need to take away the passion that these winemakers and these people have that are coming on these classes at all crazy times and are driving up mountains to come meet us and waking up at 4 a.m. to taste wines with us and then go make their kids pancakes. This is the stuff that wines is all about. Like, these are the stories that make wines amazing, in my opinion. So, Danny, thank you, and good morning. Danny's with Teperberg Wine. More often, I get to go visit Israel. Danny's on my list of people that I like to go pick my head in his little closet office, see what's going on. What kind of trouble is he getting away with in there, and what kind of cool things is he doing? There's always cool things going on at Teperberg Wine, always new things going on with Teperberg Wine, always incorporating old things with new. So that being said, I'm going to throw it over to Danny. Thank you very much. Good morning, sir. How's it going?
Good morning, Josh. Thank you. Thank you, Kosherwine.com, for having me here. So let's just jump right in. It's going well here. It's 4 a.m. as you mentioned. Funny jet lag here in Israel, but we'll just jumpstart my day a little earlier. I get to be a little bit more productive. Okay. So I'm Donnie Friedenberg. I'm one of the winemakers at Teperberg Winery. And as Josh mentioned before, I am born and raised in New York. And I made Aliyah after studying in Israel. I came back from my studies in Israel, studied in Yeshiva University. I got a degree in biology. And who knows if my parents didn't bring me back to the US, where I would be right now, because biology is the basis for how I got to winemaking. Most people don't recognize or relate sciences with winemaking, but there is a wonderful world that combines the sciences with artwork in wine, and that is all based in the fundamentals of science, of biology, microbiology, molecular biology, etc. So I really shout out to my parents, I think, or even in the chat, l'chaim to them for bringing me back to study biology. Who knows, I could have just been a farmer in Israel without it.
They're not allowed to win.
Yeah, right. They already get tastings with me as much as they want. They're on the inside. So we're going to discuss this evening an insight into the world of blending. We're going to cover many different aspects of it. It's not just what you would think of, Cabernet with Merlot. And I put this here. This is our Cabernet Sauvignon Essence. And I put this here just pretty much to say I'm appreciating everyone who's joining this chat, this Zoom session. Because I'm assuming most of people that are here to learn more about wine, to expand their knowledge, and are not here to just taste another Cabernet. Now, this is a very good Cabernet Sauvignon from our Essence series, but we're going to discuss more intricate aspects of blending and maybe aspects you've maybe never thought about wine and winemaking. And that brings us to this Van Gogh picture of the wheat fields with Cypress. This is from the wheat fields series from Van Gogh. And I put this here just to emphasize the aspect of using multiple layers, textures, and colors when it comes to making art. All forms of art use this. Now, there are certain forms of art that are single mediums, and that we can discuss in another Zoom session when we talk about maybe a single varietal wine that's from one vineyard, maybe a single vineyard wine. And we make some of those that are some of my favorite wines as well. But tonight we're going to focus on the fact that a lot of most artwork is created with many different textures and colors. And even if we're not talking about different colors, we're talking about, as I mentioned a moment ago, textures and emphasis. We can see highlights, different shades of grays, different shades of the same color sometimes can really give you different aspects and depths of understanding to a piece of art. And that's what wine is. There's so many different aspects, even when we're talking about a single varietal wine. And we'll see that later on when we taste the single varietal wine. So I'm not the only winemaker at Teperberg, of course. My boss on the left here is Shiki Roshberger. He studied in the United States as well. myself. He joined Teperberg Winery in 2002. He pretty much changed the future of Teperberg Winery with Matti Teperberg. Just a little bit about the winery for those who are not familiar. Teperberg Winery is the oldest family-owned winery in Israel. Since 1870, Zadie Teperberg moved from Odessa, Ukraine, to the old city in Jerusalem and started making wine. Now, the wines that they made in 1870 are not the wines necessarily that we would be used to drinking today, and probably not the wines that I would wake up for 4 a.m. to make a Zoom session about. But this is history, and the fact that Teperberg has gone through many, many permutations, and Shiki has been single-handedly a huge part in making Teperberg premium wines that we make today since 2002. Teperberg was once a frat winery, and Shiki with Matti Teperberg, who's the 5th generation of the Teperberg family, really changed that. The Teperberg Winery has gone from hand to hand, from father to son until now, 5 generations, as I just mentioned. So Matti Teperberg is our CEO and owner. He's in the winery almost every day of the week. He partakes in our tastings and our tasting blending panels sometimes, and he's an integral part of the winemaking. We have Olivier Frati on the right. He's been with Teperberg Winery for over a decade now as Shiki's right-hand man, as I just mentioned. And I joined in 2016 for the harvest when I came back from my studies. So this is the beginning of blending, as I would say, because this is not a wine made by a single person. This is a wine made by a team. We each bring our own interesting aspects and perspectives. As you can see here, Shiki studied in California and UC Davis. Olivier Frati studied in Bordeaux, and I studied in New York. Now, it's funny because when I tell Israelis that I'm from New York, obviously the first thing they think about is Manhattan. And then when I tell them I studied in New York, they're like, wait, what? How do you study winemaking in New York? Isn't New York just Manhattan? So as most of you know, from the US, there is a wonderful winemaking region in the upstate New York. It's called the Finger Lakes region. And that's where I studied at Cornell University. And this region is spectacular, certainly for certain styles of wines, and I'll discuss that in a moment here. Check this out. This is from my studies there. As you can see, this is not Israeli terroir. This is a site on the lake of Cayuga Lake. This is in March, barrel rackings at a winery that I was visiting and learning from. And on the right was a planting that we were doing just about a month later on the lake, the Hobbs family, East Coast. So this is a very different terroir, and so is France, and so is California. So the three of us really bring different perspectives to the winemaking team, and that's really the beginning of our blending. And when we sit on blends, when we sit on making wines, the three of us, we taste all the base wines together. That means all the constituents that would formulate, that or potentially formulate the final wine. And then we go on our own, form, and then create our blends, bring them together into the office, taste them, no one knows whose is whose, and then we decide what we think is best for the wine. So we're going in with our experiences, our perspectives, and really giving each person, each winemaker, the chance to bring what's best for the final wine. So why blend? Why would we blend wines? Why don't we just have a single wine, Cabernet, or a single vineyard wines, as many of you have heard before? So I don't know how many of you are familiar. This is a tasting wheel. There's many different types of tasting wheel. This is a pretty broad spectrum tasting wheel. So the way it works is if you start off in the center, you can start off with, as you see, part of the wheel is astringency, part of the wheel is feel, and then there's acidity and flavor. Some wheels just focus on astringency. Some wheels just talk about flavor. Some wheels just talk about aromas. And the way it works is you start up in the center and you start to move out. And these are wonderful tools. You can find them online for expanding your vernacular, for really trying to pinpoint, wait, what is that I'm experiencing? I know this flavor, I know this aroma, this feeling. You can just use these words that you know, supple, soft, rich, mouth coating for describing tannins, things that, wait, you know these words, they're in your lexicon, but they're not necessarily right for the picking for when you're tasting wine. So these are wonderful tools. So when we look at this wheel, this really starts to give you an understanding of why would we blend? Maybe I have a wine that has the weight or has higher acidity, but it's not so aromatic. And I want to bring them together to create a wine that has the weight or has more vibrant acidity, but also has more aromatic complexity to it. Or maybe I have a wine that's very fruity, but I want to add a little bit more floral components. wines to make it also more complex.
When you're starting a blend, do you know what the end in your head is going to taste like?
Good question. So in general, when you're working with a wine in a series, you have a target that you want to hit, or maybe, 2014, 2015, 2016 came out a certain way, and now you're deciding I want to take it just a little bit differently. So you have a starting point of where you want to go, unless you're creating a brand new wine, in which case you have inspiration and you seek out that inspiration, and it's almost like having a picture that you want to paint in your head, but it's never been on canvas yet. You know where you want to go, but you never know how it's going to end up. And so that same goes with texture in your mouth. When we drink red wines, many of you have experienced one wine is too dry, maybe the wine is too soft and not filling your mouth enough. This also plays a big role in our blending. What textures of wine, we put a lot of emphasis on the texture. We strive to create wines that are accessible for drinking upon release, but also many of them in our premium series have the potential for aging as well. Some wines are created in the wine world where they have a lot of potential feature, but they're very difficult to drink in their youth. So we put a lot of emphasis, and that's mostly because of texture reasons. Also, there's flavor development, but a lot of it's texture based. So we put a lot of emphasis on our texture when we're building red wines in our portfolios. So sometimes we blend because we blend varieties. So varieties, as you all know, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, all these types of wines, these types of grapes. So sometimes we blend them together. So many of you know Bordeaux, okay? As an example, we have Bordeaux whites. Bordeaux whites most typically are Sauvignon Blanc and Semillon. Bordeaux reds, depending on where they are within Bordeaux, doesn't make a difference. They're using the 5 Bordeaux reds. Maybe someone's lucky to have a little Carmenere in there. But or most people know, when you're talking about certain regions, that you're blending certain varieties based on the region. They don't even write on the label what the grapes are in it, because it's known based on that area that these are the grapes that are grown in that area, and that's what they're blending. They don't make varietal wines in many areas in the old world winemaking. But that brings us to here. So on the right, you have an incredible picture that I found from an archaeologist. You have on the right, you have a wine press, an ancient wine press from the Ella Valley. So in the top circle you see with a little crevice that leans down into the square, that's where they would press the grapes, and the juice would drip down into the wine base, into the basin where it would ferment. But Israel is incredible because it has this ancient history with the modernization of today. So we have the young premium wine industry with our history of winemaking as well. And so because of we don't have these traditions like we would have in old world winemaking, where they have hundreds of years old of just blending certain grapes, and that's all that they can grow in that area. They're regulated to that. In order to call it Bordeaux, you cannot grow Syrah or put Syrah into your blend. You would have to call it a French wine. And so in Israel, we don't have those regulations of what we can use or how we can use it. We have a very long regulations book of how to make wine, but in terms of what we're restricted to for blends, we're very open. And that brings us to this picture. This is one of my favorite vineyards in all of Israel. I'm so lucky that it's not so far from my home, about a 35-minute drive. This is in the Judean Hills. I live in the Judean Hills, by the way, just between Beit Shemesh and Jerusalem. For anyone who's familiar with the area, I'm on the same road as Kibbutz Suba, just down the road from the old Castell Winery. Mm-hmm. And this area is rich and lush with vineyards and the beautiful terroir. It happens to be one of my favorite terroirs in all of Israel. So this is one of my favorite vineyards. And you can just see it's just so beautiful to look at. And this picture only captures part of the glory. Look at how in the basin you have these straight rectangular plots, and all along the side of the hillside you have these terrace plots as well, much more narrow, smaller plots. This vineyard site is over 100 dunam. A dunam is a quarter of an acre, and we're talking about many varieties that grow here. So this is a vineyard site that has the potential to grow so many different types of grapes. And I stress that because sometimes when we talk about blends, we talk about field blends. And a field blend means that there you have one vineyard that's planted with many different grapes. But sometimes you have a vineyard that's planted with separate plots of different grapes, and you can harvest them separate or you can harvest them together. Here in this site, we grow Pinot Gris, we grow Sauvignon Blanc, we grow Roussanne, 3 types of white grapes. We grow Cabernet Franc for our Legacy series here. This is a very beautiful site, wonderful airflow. And because of the different aspects along the side of the hillside and also the way the air flows in the basin, we have the opportunity to grow different grapes based on their needs. Not all grapes grow under the same conditions. So they each need their own microclimate, soil. Even within one site, you're going to have many different soil types within the mix. So it's very important to understand what you're working with, to know how you're going to blend, because even within this one site, if I grow Sauvignon Blanc on the north-facing side, and I grow Sauvignon Blanc also on the south-facing side, I'm going to have very different aspects or profiles of the very same grape, very same clone. But let's open up, I'm going to open up, I already opened up, the first wine that we're going to taste. So before we do that though, I really like to throw this idea out there before I do any tasting. Most of you are probably familiar, if you're joining a Zoom session like this, the different steps to tasting wine. So we're not drinking water here, we're not drinking a soda here. So we look, we smell, and we taste. Those things are familiar to most of you. But the fourth quadrant here, thinking, is something I can't stress enough. I implore of everyone, whoever you drink wine with as well, to think, what is your experience? Everyone has the opportunity to experience the wine in their own way, and what you experience is true and real for you. And so if I'm experiencing citrus, but you're experiencing lychee, it's true, it's real for you because your associations with the aromas and flavors. Now, that being said, there are flavor compounds that I can say are actually in this. There's actual flavor compounds that come from the grapes or come from oak or whatever it is, but it's how you experience it. And so what might be tasty for one person might not be for someone else. So not everyone has to like the same wine, and the opportunity to discover what kinds of wines that you like, what kind of wine you would like for one session or for one meal or for any occasion. There's the opportunity to think expansively, and that's all before we begin. So this is the first one we're going to taste, the Vision Dry White. So I believe you guys over there at Kosherwine.com have the 2018 right now. I'm privy to be on the 2019. There's just slight differences. They come from the same vineyards. So what do we have here in this Vision Dry White? So first of all, the Vision series is a series that is our entry-level series. So as I mentioned before, that we're on the 5th generation of the Teperberg family in the winery. So each series that we have represents the next another generation. So this is the 5th generation, the Vision series, our entry-level series. And we have 2 whites in this series, and we have many reds, like Shiraz, we have a Malbec, we have a Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, etc. Now, these wines are meant to, as people would say, a pop and go, really just easy drinking wines. So for the Vision Dry White, what we shoot for in the blend is a crisp, aromatic, easy drinking white wine. There is no oak involved with this wine. It's really light on the palate. So what grapes do we have here? What's the blend here? So we have Sauvignon Blanc and French Colombard. French Colombard is otherwise known in Europe as just Colombard, and North America really became known as French Colombard. That in of itself is a hybrid of 2 different grapes, but we don't need to get into that. The world of blending really goes deep into wine, from the very sources of the grapes, from the very sources of the vines. So when we bring together the Sauvignon Blanc and the French Colombard in this wine, we're shooting for a fruity wine with a little bit of floral characteristics. The 2018 was a little more citrusy with a little bit more orange fruit, I would say. Here in the 2019, the Sauvignon Blanc takes a much more tropical role. Both wines, 2018 and 2019, are about 60% Sauvignon Blanc, 40% French Colombard. These are not, Josh, as you asked before, do we know what it's going to be always? You know, one year it could be 60-40, another year it can be, the opposite, or it can be 50-50. It really depends on finding that ideal balance in the wine. So I'm going to taste this wine right now. I'm on the 2019 Vision Dry White. So having an entry-level white wine like this that I'm proud to actually taste at 4 a.m., Josh, especially this 2019, is so vibrant and so fresh. I haven't tasted it probably in over a month. So every time I get to open it, it's really nice. I'm probably going to drink this a little bit more often now that it's summer here in Israel. So yeah, as a fresh, dry white, this can be opened up anytime with fruit, with a salad, with a light meal as well. You could have this with a light dinner as well, pastas, chickens, etc.
I know we don't have the new rosé in front of us, but if you could just give us, because I know everyone's going to jump online to be grabbing it because it's the time of year everyone's drinking it. Can you give us your quick tasting notes on that also, maybe?
So yeah, I take a lot of pride in the winemaking in terms of our white wines and rosés. I mean, I'm a part of all the winemaking at Teperberg Winery, but there's a deep passion for me in white wines and rosé here in Israel. And so starting with even the entry levels as well. But what I want to say is the freshness, fresh characteristics is something I try to instill in all of our wines because of that aspect that Darren was talking about. And so this Teperberg Essence Rosé, it's a fairly new rosé for Teperberg Winery. Once upon a time, we only had a single rosé, and it was a very different style rosé. Today, we're making fresh, crisp, lighter rosés. The Essence Rosé 2019 is, I think, one of my favorites that we've made thus far. It's a blend, and if we're talking about blends, this is a non-conventional blend. So we're talking about 3 grapes, Grenache, Mourvèdre, and Barbera. You won't find those blends other places in the world because they come from completely different regions. Most people don't even think to use those grapes together, but they come together so beautifully. You have fruity characteristics from one grape. You have a little bit of herbal mint characteristics from another. You have acid backbone from the Barbera. It's really fresh, really crisp, really light. And it's really easy drinking. I think it's only around 11.5, 12% alcohol. It's just a really easy drinking, but really elegant, very light colored rosé. White screen for a moment. We're about to move into the Inspire series. The Inspire series was born out of the old portfolio of Teperberg. Anyone who's familiar with this wine might know what I mean by that. So this is the old Meritage from the previous Teperberg branding. And this Meritage gave birth to the entire Inspire series. Meritage is a blend. It's a Bordeaux blend. You couldn't call a wine a Bordeaux blend outside of Bordeaux. So there's a Meritage Alliance in California that created the term Meritage for any wine that's just using Bordeaux varieties. And so we carried along this beautiful wine into the new series, the Inspire series, as you can see here on the right on my screen. It's the purple capsule wine. It's the Meritage. So that's a classic Bordeaux blend. To the left of it is the silver capsule wine. That's the Integritage. And that's a Rhone style, more Mediterranean blend. So we're using grapes like Carignan, Syrah, Mourvèdre, Grenache, a lighter, more fruit forward, lighter bodied, as I just mentioned, wine. We'll skip over the middle wine because we're going to taste that later as well, and we're going to move all the way over to the Femitage, which I'm holding right here in my hand. This Femitage is a novel blend from Teperberg as well, and there's something really interesting about it. The star of this wine is a grape that maybe many of you are not familiar with, and that is Dabuki. So for those of you who are not familiar, Dabuki is an indigenous grape to Israel. So over the past years, there's been a lot of research into the indigenous grapes of Israel, and Dabuki is one of them. Many wineries in Israel now have started in the past few years using indigenous grapes. That means grapes that have been thousands of years. I think Shivi Jory mentioned that he has over 100 different varieties that he is in the middle of researching their genetic data for identifying them. And Dabuki is one of them that still exists in vineyards that are large enough to produce from. They were kept growing in large enough quantities. This vineyard that we're using here for our Dabuki is quite old vines from 1974 planting. So we're getting low fruit yield with more concentrated flavor. And what's also interesting is the history of Dabuki is that for a while, it was just a table grape. As you'll see in the next photo here. Let's just move on there. it doesn't look like a wine grape. The berries are much bigger. So no one thought of making this as a wine grape, but it had so much fruit aromatic flavors to it that some pioneer winemakers decided to start working with it, Avi Feldstein being one of them. And it really creates an interesting wine. We started using this in our Inspire blend for our Femitage. So we make 2 white wines in this series. I think only one of them at the moment is brought to the US. So the other one is a little bit more round and fruity Sauvignon driven. This one has Sauvignon Blanc in it, but it's more of the acid backbone for the wine, less of the tropical profile. So when I talk about Tabuki, I think immediately of the melon, but we're talking like more honeydew, the green melon flavors, a little bit of an herbal characteristic. It's a very lean grape as well. This is not a grape that gives you weight and a lot of texture, which makes it a wonderful blending wine. So this wine, I believe, is 50 or 55% Tabuki. 2018, I think, is 55% Tabuki. Right. Then we have Sauvignon Blanc and Gewürztraminer. So as I mentioned before, the Sauvignon Blanc, when we're talking about blending, here's a wine when we're talking about blending that I'm bringing very different characteristics to form a harmonious wine. So I'm bringing that interesting melon herbal characteristic together with the acid characteristic of the Sauvignon with a little bit of the floral tropical hints behind it from the Gewürztraminer. 3 very different worlds that come together in a very beautiful way. I haven't tasted 2018 in a while. I've been drinking 2019 also. As I mentioned before, most of our whites were on 2019 already.
How long, can you tell us a little bit maybe, how long can this wine survive in the bottle and temperature on something like this?
Yeah, this wine is developing beautifully. I think those melon characteristics are becoming even a little bit more juicy now as it's aging. Yeah, they're certainly coming to the forefront of this wine. I think this wine is still really vibrant and really beautiful. I'm going to taste it on the palate and we'll see where it's going.
But since this is fresh and clean, Danny, this is something that should be consumed in 1 to 3 years, probably.
Yeah. So absolutely. I would definitely say so. This is a white wine, no oak on it either. So when we talk about oak aging, with white wines in particular, oak is something besides for flavor. We can discuss that later. That's the least important aspect of oak barrels for me when we're talking about aging. The most important part is the longevity of a wine. So most white wines that are not aged in oak, unless they're coming from a region like the Mosel region in Germany where they have crazy acidity, they're not meant for long aging wines. There are, of course, exceptions. I would say, 1 to 3 years is fine for this wine. This wine we're in 2018 right now. It's 2020. Wine is beautiful. It's drinking beautifully right now, and it's drinking window where we're going next. So here we're staying in the same series. So as mentioned before, we're in a blended series. Okay, so this is the Devotage. Devotage has become the star of the lineup in Israel. I would say mostly because of its universality. It's just such a universal wine that you can drink with many different occasions or foods. Let's talk about it. So what do we got here? This is a two variety blend wine. So we have Malbec and Marcellin. So Malbec, most of you are familiar with. Malbec is one of the grapes from Bordeaux, not from Argentina, though they did make it quite famous. It's made as a varietal wine in Cahors in France as well. Malbec brings that dark, juicy, violet characteristic to a wine. And Marcellin, Marcellin, I don't know how many of you are familiar with, but it's a grape that was created in the south of France. And it's also a hybrid of 2 different grapes that you are familiar with. One is Cabernet Sauvignon and the other one is Grenache. So what do we get from those 2 parent grapes? So the Cabernet Sauvignon gives the Marcellin its structure and its depth, and the Grenache brings that fruity, juicier characteristic. So you heard me mention juicy twice with Malbec and Marcellin. So here's a blend that was created for the sake of just complementing each other, in the sense that it's like almost like having your best friend that you like listening to the same music with. So 2 grapes bring that really great, deep, dark, juicy, berry-filled characteristic to the wine, and they blend beautifully together. Both of these grapes were grown in the Ayalon Valley, in the same vineyard site, but 2 very different plots with different soils, which, as I mentioned before, it's really important to understand what you need for each grape. So here's a picture of both Malbec and Marcellin, and they look very different for two reasons. One, because they're in two different stages. So the bottom picture is the Malbec, probably just days before picking. You can see it just, to me, it looks juicy and ready for picking. Obviously, we go through the vineyards and we taste the grapes and make sure that they are really ready in terms of texture, flavor, profile. And then above, we have the Marcellin. And if you see that the hue of the grape, it's much more blue, just like Cabernet Sauvignon. I don't know how many of you are familiar with what Cabernet Sauvignon looks like in the vineyards, but Cabernet has a much more blue hint to it than the black that you're getting in the Malbec below. The Marcellin picture above is from an earlier stage in growing. I would say that's probably right before we're about to fruit thin. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with fruit thinning is lowering the yield. So if we have too many grapes on a single vine, it might not be able to ripen well enough that you for the picking. So we'll take off some clusters in order to make more concentrated, more even ripening. And Marcellin, because it comes from the Grenache family, Grenache is a lot of yield, like incredible amount of clusters. Sometimes they can also be very large. So it's really important to grow balanced vines when you're making premium wines. And so we have to really be very diligent in how much fruit is grown in each vine.
And I hear a lot of people walk, and you mentioned it earlier, you said not like Argentinian Malbec.
Right.
They did put it maybe back on the map. Why do people like Malbec so much? And I'm also finding maybe it's people that are just getting used to red wines. They like it. Is there a reason? Can you tell us a little bit about Malbec as a grape and what makes it user-friendly?
Absolutely. And I think that user-friendly aspect that you're referring to is also what makes it so wonderful for growing in Israel. So when I said before that Israel is a young wine region, and we're just discovering what works here, we have a lot of varieties here. They might not all work here for the long run. Malbec is something that really just shines here. It grows so nicely here, and that really translates into its characteristic and its profile. That it's that juicy, fruity characteristic. And when I say it's not like the Argentinian Malbec can be very tough on the palate. These are much more round wines. And so the Inspire Devotage comes in really round and soft on the palate with that really fruit-forward characteristic. This is a wine that's aged only 8 months in barrel, so it gains more complexity and depth, and also the ability to age a little bit longer, but without being too heavy of a wine. And so I think that aspect makes it really accessible and also lends that universal characteristic that people that are avid wine drinkers like this wine, and also people that are just starting to drink wines with red wines with more body and more complexity also really like this wine. It's a really nice access point. So here we are with one of the wines from our flagship series. So heavy bottle, early morning workout. And so varietal wines I write here can be blends as well. So I bring up 4 different points. So I can have a varietal wine such as this one, the Petite Syrah, that I'll discuss in a moment, that's made from 2 different vineyards, such as this one. The 2014 vintage is made from 2 different vineyards. One vineyard is from the Ayalon Valley, where we tasted the Malbec and Marcellin as well. Same vineyard site, very different plot, much older vines. And then we have another site from the 2014 vintage from Malay Gilboa up north, more mountainous climate. So two different sites of the very same variety will lend different characteristics to the final blend. In a varietal wine, you can have the same vineyard, as I mentioned before, but different blocks. So like the Malbec and the Devotage, in the same vineyard site, I have 5 other Malbecs. They don't all go to that wine, but I have different Malbecs within the same vineyard site, and I can blend those as well. So that's an aspect of winemaking that lends to depth of blending. I can also have the same variety in the same vineyard, in the same block, and I can pick it at 2 different dates. So say I want to gain a little bit more acidity and gain a little bit more green fruit. If I was, let's say, for Viognier for a white wine, and then I want to pick a later date to add a little bit more of that apricot flavor as well. So I can pick the same vineyard site, 2 different dates, and gain very different profiles, and then make different wines and blend them back together later on. That's the same variety. In the varietal wine, that's still a blend. And then finally, barrel blending, and I'll discuss that more in a moment. So here we have the Legacy series. In this series, we have 3 different wines. This is one of the 3. The other 2 are Petit Verdot and Cabernet Franc. And I think what makes this series so unique and so special to me is that These are three grapes that are not typical to be in any winery's top portfolio series. And that, I think, lends from the winemaking challenges as well. So each one of these grapes has its challenges. Cabernet Franc, if you don't grow it balanced, can have very big berries and can be very green, like chewing on a green pepper. Petite Verdot is a grape that in France you'll never see a varietal wine made from it, because same with Cabernet Franc, it just will be way too chewy, and very difficult to round off on the palate. And Petite Syrah as well. Okay, so Petite Syrah, I'll just preface, this is not Syrah. Okay, though it comes from hybridization of Syrah with another grape. This isn't Syrah. This is a completely different variety now, and it has different characteristics and different profile. So the Petite Syrah here is a little bit more earthy in its characteristic. It also has those berry characteristics and spice, but I think a little bit less of the black pepper. We're going to have a little bit more of brown spices on the wine. So Petite Syrah, why did I mention that it's not like Syrah? Because that's part of its challenge. Syrah doesn't really have much of a tannin structure. Tannin's what makes your mouth have that drying feeling, but the structure in the palate as well. So Petite Syrah has a lot of tannin structure. And if you don't work with it well, you're going to create a wine that's just super astringent and very hard to drink. And so these three wines are very unique in the fact that we have to work very meticulously in their craft. So each of the three wines, Petite Syrah included, is aged for 18 months in French oak barrels. I think in 2014 they're all new, and for their vintages they're mostly new as well. And yet the oak gets to be integrated into the wines. These are wines that have a lot of structure, as I just mentioned, a lot of body and a lot of depth, so they can really take on new oak in a way that integrates the flavors very beautifully into the wine. And we'll speak a little bit about, so I mentioned before that we can have different vineyard sites from the same vineyard, from the same grape. So here we have two different Petite Syrah clusters. They look very similar, but one's from the Molly Gilboa site, one's from the Ione Valley site. So two different terroirs. A little bit about the wine making of this wine. So as a commercial winery, many of you know we have a vast portfolio. These wines, though, we treat in a very boutique way. So we're talking about smaller tanks, smaller plots, and much softer handling. So yeah, we're looking at a lot of stainless steel here, but what you have to understand is, you see these legs going up on the right picture. They're creating what we call the gallery at our winery. Up above on that second floor are much smaller tanks where we ferment these smaller plots. And what we get to do is we get to use these funnels, I don't know if you can see them, right here at the end of fermentation. Imagine a grape skin before fermentation. We all know that it's very thin, very soft. Now imagine after fermentation, we have heat, we have alcohol, we have acid, we have the pump overs and punch downs. The skins are so delicate. We want to be so soft with them, especially when I mentioned that Petite Syrah we want to be very careful with our tannin extraction. So we use just gravity flow. We open up the grates here and we gravity flow down from these funnels into a press. And we essentially just use the press as a sieve, and we use the free run from this wine very gently, very soft and minimal pressing in the press. And this is what it looks like when we're pressing. It's lovely to see. So it's gravity flow, it's very gentle. We're not using heavy machinery and pumps in order to move the wine after fermentation. I'm gonna pour this wine, there you go. Now, Josh, again, I haven't tasted this wine in a while. This is 2014. I'm assuming, I felt it when I opened it because I always check my wines before tasting. Beautifully in its drinking window. This is the wine that still has plenty of time on it to age. That comes from vineyard and from the way we create this wine in terms of barrel aging as well.
Something to look forward to. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about, the varieties, the differences you're finding in the vintages, and maybe some of the upcoming vintages that are that we should be looking out for and buying to hold on to.
So one interesting aspect, though, I would say before I get into vintages from the Legacy series is that from the 2016 harvest and on, we're not adding any yeast. So it's all native yeast being used for the fermentations, which really speaks to the terroir of each vineyard. As we ferment each vineyard separately, each one is bringing its native yeast potential to the wine. So, and it creates a really depth of complexity to the wine that we didn't have before. The 2016 vintage is really beautiful throughout the Legacy series, the Cabernet Franc, Petite Verdot, and Petite Syrah. So the differences, I would say also, let's just talk about Petite Syrah first. Petite Syrah, as I mentioned, in 2014. Oh, by the way, for anyone who's not familiar, in 2015, we did not make a Legacy series. So we shoot from 2014 to 2016. That's because of Shemitah, the sabbatical year. So the 2014 was made from two different vineyards, whereas 2016 was made from a single vineyard, Petite Syrah, and that's just the Ayalon Valley. We found that it really was just able to represent that depth of fruit, that vintage, just on its own in such a beautiful way. And then as far as the Cabernet Franc and Petite Verdot, what's really beautiful about the 2016 vintages is that we started working a lot more with that vineyard site that I showed you earlier from the Judean Hills and the Gush Etzion area. And that brings a lot of beautiful, fresh characteristics to the wine because of the really cool Jerusalem Hill airs that flow through that side. And I think that brings a very different perspective to and profile to both Cabernet Franc and Petite Verdot in the Legacy series.